Welcome to the second part of our interview between Bob Willott and Nick Tomlinson, discussing Bob's latest book, Between the Balance Sheets, including insights into the financial dealings of some of the biggest names in the industry.
In the foreword, which was written by Sir Martin Sorrell for the book, he describes marketing services as having transitioned from being a cottage industry to being a fully-fledged business sector in its own right. I wonder, do you think that it has made that transition, and actually is it to the benefit of the industry?
There is still a part of it as a cottage industry. I think there always will be a cottage industry. It is true that the scale of the industry is polarized. You really have very large conglomerates now at one end, and at the other you still have people starting up. I think that the difficulties, I think you'll always have young, talented people, entrepreneurial people, creative people who want to feel they've got the freedom to do their own thing, good entrepreneurial spirit. They may be very happy initially in an agency that grows. When it becomes part of a big corporate conglomeration, they feel less able to fulfill themselves. And I think that will always happen. I don't think it's going to change. So they will look elsewhere, if you like, to fulfill themselves. The question then is, can I leave an established agency and start a new agency? Is it that easy? Well, it was never totally easy, but it was easier than it is now. You've now got to have much more capital. You probably therefore need other backers rather than just your own bank account and friendly bank manager. So I think the imperative is still there, or the opportunity is still there. The pressure is still there, but it's less intense. But there will always be, I think, sort of small agencies starting up, and at the same time, the big ones will get bigger.
Yeah. I think within the once acquisitions are a thing or in people's mind, there's always the dilemma of trying to maximise the value by reporting a healthy growth of profit and possibly putting a slightly rosy spin on it. I'm sure it has happened occasionally. And because of that, then buyers tend to insist on an earn-out so that they can then actually see, well, actually, you say you're selling the business with this wonderful performance and it's going to grow. Has it happened? But earn-outs always seem to be quite a difficult time, a kind of no man's land where neither the acquirer or acquiree has got total control of things. On the subject of earn-outs, in the chapter you talk about Jeremy Middleton, who was the founder of MSQ, and the fact that he didn't believe in earn-outs, and he would pay the price he paid was the price he paid. Do you think that's a better way of doing that?
Bless him. I think he was slightly mistaken in that view, and indeed we've talked about it a lot. Although in his favour, we commissioned some research from Roger Hussey years ago now into earn-outs, and there was a lot of evidence that people they wouldn't make any capital investments in the company, for example, if there was an earn-out. They wanted to maximise profit. So lots of decisions were being made as very short-term decisions during the earn-out period, and that was having an adverse effect on the long-term value of the company. So he sort of had a point. He had a point in the sense that people can try to inflate earn-outs. But I think the downside was that he wasn't able to buy some companies who would have wanted an earn-out, and for legitimate good reasons. And he would say, no, I don't want them because it's too uncertain, blah, blah, blah. And I think in the nicest possible way, he'd probably sort of accept that there are those two views and that there's not an absolute one way or the other. And I think also he certainly missed out on buying some companies he might otherwise have bought. And he probably bought some companies that he might regret having bought because they were just desperate to get a deal and happy to take the cash even if it was less money.
Mm. One of the chapters that was particularly interesting is the one on MNC Sai, when I think the original article, which was from 2016, you talk about the plan they put in place so that when people sell their businesses to the agency, they retain some of the equity in that, which they could then, over a period of time, convert into shares in the main agency. And then in the update, the more recent update of that, you've explained how recently there's been a change of opinion about the accounting treatment of that, which has had a big impact on the profitability and the price of MNC Sai, and has nearly cost them their independence.
Well, certainly my personal view about ensuring that key people can have a sense of ownership, it's something I've held right through, and I still think it's true. And I think when MNC decided that they wanted to ensure that their key people in subsidiary companies and indeed companies they bought retain some form of equity stake, partnership stake, I thought it was extremely laudable. It was hopefully going to reduce the risk of all your talented people just leaving. You sell your business, you'll move on and start another one. Although ironically, in the end, that's what the society directors did. So I did genuinely think it was desirable. I still think it's desirable. But I don't think, when MNC announced what they were doing, and I talked it through with them, it seemed eminently sensible. There seemed to be they had not identified any downsides, or if they had, I certainly wasn't made aware of them. And I was very happy to say, I was glad to see it was happening. I was surprised it wasn't happening elsewhere. When I look back now, maybe one of the reasons why it wasn't happening elsewhere was because the accountants involved couldn't necessarily agree on what was the right way of treating it in the accounts. So the concept, I think, is still absolutely vital, that people can own shares in their own company, in a people business, and in a way that's obviously is fair, is not sort of penalised in any tax way, or indeed it's not unduly favourable in any tax way. It's just neutral. It just allows them to feel part owners. At MNC, it is certainly the case that having introduced this approach, which appeared to be very healthy and helpful, the auditors came along and one after another, and literally they did have three firms I'm thinking of, took different views. So we had, I can't remember which one's which now, but I think I certainly PwC took the view that changes were necessary. KPMG had a hand in it too. They've all gone on again now. They've been there, they've gone, and it's auditors back to what they used to be. But the problems with it were that it required you to, if you were having an earn-out, subject to the way the contracts were framed, you had to show the cost of that earn-out not as part of the purchase price, as a capital cost in the balance sheet, but as remuneration to the people receiving the earn-out. So that was a straight charge in the profit and loss account. And clearly earn-outs can be quite a lot of money. So you could suddenly have a set of accounts you're producing which profit suddenly dropped dramatically because you had to charge these purchase prices as remuneration. It gets more complicated where you had an existing company that they bought and they left minority shareholdings with some of the founders, and that gave them put options to, in due course, sell their shares to the parent company, and then if they wanted to sell them to the public company. Because you're sort of required to value what that put option is going to be worth, and you have to sort of take it into your accounts before it's even happened. And you were having situations where MNC, and they weren't the only company, MNC was reporting profits that were going up and down like a yo-yo, only because the way in which they had to keep on revaluing the potential earn-outs and put options. And to me, that's absolutely ludicrous. It was an unreal world, and it was unfair to them because their accounts were going up and down and nobody knew what was going on from the outside. And I don't think it did the accounting profession any favours either.
You mentioned the variability of profits, and I think that there are some quite startling graphs where companies almost seesaw from making profits to making losses. A lot of that is related to the topic of goodwill and amortization and writing that off, which again comes down to the acquisition process and where people perhaps overpay for businesses.
Yes.
I mean, some of the figures are enormous. I think the Microsoft one was in the billions.
Oh yes, it probably was. Yes, yeah, absolutely.
And you wonder, how can a company like Microsoft get an acquisition wrong in terms of the value by billions over a 2-year period, which I think was the period after which they wrote it off.
Yeah. It's obviously quite easy, isn't it? Yes, and it's a good question. I don't think that in itself suggests that the accounting treatment is wrong. I mean, I think the reality is if you buy something that has tangible assets like a table and a few things worth 10 quid, but the profitability of it is so great that it's worth a lot more as a multiple of its earnings, then you will pay that much big higher price. What matters is that value likely to be supported by ongoing profit streams? And that's the area of judgment which people tend to get wrong. The example you quoted is almost certainly the case. So I don't think it's an argument against creating goodwill, because I can't think of any other way of reflecting the full value paid. But I think it does emphasise quite dramatically the dangers inherent in buying companies that, particularly those who don't have a lot of tangible assets, which are clearly marketing companies won't have normally.
And do you think that with the advent of higher rates of inflation and interest rates rising, that's going to make a difference?
You'd sort of assume it might, wouldn't you? Because clearly if money is becoming more expensive, therefore, you're not going to go and buy a company. And bearing in mind that most of these deals in the past have involved raising quite a lot of cash to buy them, particularly in sort of the middle-ranking market public companies. If that money is going to cost a lot more, then you're going to be more cautious about how you spend it. And therefore, if you're doing a deal and you sort of money isn't too expensive, at a bit of a tight negotiation, you sort of say, well, actually, maybe we could afford to pay a bit more for it, and that will clinch the deal. You'd do it. You might not do that now. You might walk away. So I think it will slow up the pace of acquisitions.
I think there's been the word in the market is that there aren't enough good companies to buy. So you either buy not such a good company or you overpay for a good company.
Yes. I'd absolutely agree. I mean, supply and demand, the law of is fundamental to everything. And if there isn't a supply of good companies, but people want to buy companies, then they will overpay. Which is what happened, of course, in the great growth periods, wasn't it? I mean, when we saw those UK companies all getting market flotations, and as soon as they got a quotation on the stock market, they were told, what you have to do now is buy companies and become bigger that way. So they were rushing off around the world buying stuff.
Yeah.
Some would prove very costly.
I mean, would you say, you mentioned earlier on about entrepreneurs, how, moving on from cottage industry and how now you need to have some capital. But is it a failing of the way business is done at the moment that it's very difficult as an entrepreneur to get capital, to raise capital?
I think it is harder. I'm not so much involved personally now, so I'm not perhaps the best person to answer the question, but I think it is definitely going to be harder for two reasons. One, the cost of starting up a business now seems to be a lot more than it was in my day, and it needs funding from people who don't just see it as a short-term punt. And secondly, I think there is almost certainly at the moment a shortage of people prepared to provide capital, other than the sort who, on the whole, you shouldn't be borrowing from, for building a business. So it's a much harder time now, and we don't, unless I'm misreading it, we don't see so many startups, I don't think, in recent years, than certainly in my heyday, as it were.
I always think of VCCP, who are probably our biggest client, who when they first came to us, they were 11 people. They'd been going for 6 months, but basically created by O2, saying, would you start as an agency, which is it still happens.
Yes. There's a lot of risks associated being reliant on one big client. I've always argued that you need at least 3, not for any particularly clever reason. It is inherently dangerous to being over-dependent on too few clients. Even if you are lucky enough to start on the back of O2 or whoever it might be, and there's another agent I think was very much dependent on Sony Ericsson, for example. Yep. And there will be. Good luck to them, that's fine, but work very hard to make sure you can try and get 1 or 2 other pretty strong clients. Because however good they seem and however loyal they seem, their circumstances might change. And they may, for whatever reason, they may vanish.
Sony Ericsson was presumably Iris.
I think that's right. Yeah. I think they were Iris, yeah.
Yeah, who again, I think they were 20 people when they came to us. But VCP and Iris are always the stories I tell about people who came to us when they were tiny. But Sony Ericsson, I think with Iris, Sony Ericsson wanted them to grow internationally, so they kept opening offices just with Sony Ericsson business, but they were quite good at attracting other business in those offices. And then when Sony Ericsson went, they weren't really dependent on them at all.
No.
Is international, is it a lure for companies? Is it something that they are better off concentrating on their home market and the market that they know?
I don't think you should aim to become international for the sake of it. It is perfectly true that some of the successful agency groups have benefited quite considerably from one or two clients that have themselves been expansionists or have already been international and are worried about the fact their agency couldn't necessarily service it internationally. And I think that's not uncommon. You have a client that's international. They come to you, first of all, to handle their UK business. And then the issue arises, well, actually, maybe we could do more than just your UK business, Mr. Client. And it gradually evolves from that because they're doing good work. And so it does need a lot of sort of care in how you handle that situation. So there are lots of drivers saying you need to go international. So I certainly wouldn't say you must go international, but I think many agencies will find they have to become international in one way or another in due course, even if it's just to service existing clients. And how they do that is absolutely critical. And they mustn't risk the entire business in doing that. Easy to say.
Well, where next in terms of the finance behind industry? People have been saying for years that the big consultancies are coming in, and when Accenture started coming into the market, people thought that was the beginning, but it doesn't seem to have really materialised. Or do you think it still is yet to come?
That's a very hard one to answer because my gut reaction is that there was never any particularly logical reason why consultancy should want to buy into it any more than anybody else. It's not to say it shouldn't have done, but I failed to see any massive benefit in moving into it in terms of being complementary to their existing consultancy services. I mean, I can see certain things that marketing agencies could do that help them in their consultancy. So it's not a no-no. But I'm not really sure. And I think my perception of it is that it suits some consultancies to be able to expand their business more broadly by, if you like, investing in these other areas. And good luck to them. But I don't think it's a given that means that consultancies generally are going to be dead keen to be buying up the marketing industry. It hasn't sort of taken off, I don't think, has it? I mean, it's happened a bit, but it hasn't taken off.
I get the impression that, merging all the brands into Accenture Song and with some fairly notable departures, and some in the last couple of weeks, that it's not a lot of wind in its sails, but that's...
There's not enough harmony in the song.
Exactly.
If you're going to sell a business successfully, you've got to make sure that there's something that's going to continue.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that's my dying regret will be that nobody, including me, has really found a way of allowing people business to continue independently if they wish to through more than one generation.
So, Bob, thank you very much for spending time today, and thank you for writing the book. I think it's very insightful. Obviously, I've appreciated the Fintellect series over the years, and to see everything brought back and updated has been really useful and really interesting. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you for watching Bob Willett's interview with Nick Tomlinson, MD of Paprika. Don't forget, you can order a copy of Between the Balance Sheets with the special 10% discount by clicking the link in our newsletter to download your order form.